What's up? I'm back. Surprise. I am very proud of myself. Guess what? It hasn't been 10 months. and I'm back. Again, no promises, but maybe this is a good sign. Maybe this is a good sign that I might be back-ish. I am taking a break from watching Women's March Madness to film this video because I haven't done a wrap-up in 2 years, maybe? I honestly don't know. The past two videos have been very spaced apart from any other videos, so as we've discussed previously, I am going to do a wrap up of basically the first quarter of this year, so January to March. It is March 29th as I'm filming this, and I've read 33 books according to Storygraph, although it might be counting one of these books twice, so I don't know. We'll see how many it is by the end of this video. At the beginning of this year, I've read a lot more just day to day than I did in basically all of last year. As I've said before, I had a kid last year, and as people say, they take up a lot of your time. And we're finally getting into some sort of routine and rhythm and stuff where I have the time to read more. I want to read more. I'm not exhausted all the time. And therefore, I'm also wanting to film. So here we are. So I've read 33, I think, books so far this year, and we're just going to go through and talk about all of them. Because there's so many, I'm not going to do like an in-depth review of all of these or like a full synopsis or anything, especially if it's one that I didn't love. I'll probably just mention it. But some of the ones I loved or have strong feelings about, I will talk a little bit more in depth. Okay, no, actually I read 32 books, not 33. Okay, see? First up, I read Passing Strange by Ellen Kalages. I'm not totally sure I'm saying that name correctly. This was a novella that was, it was like a historical fantasy, very fantasy light. Sorry if you can hear the plane outside. I cracked my window so I didn't have to have my AC on, but I do live close-ish to an airport, so here we are. This was a like romantic historical fantasy novella that was really beautiful. It was just about, I think it was set in like the 20s. I want to say the 20s. Around that time. Maybe it was like the 30s. I'm not totally sure. I don't remember. It's about being queer in a time where being queer wasn't acceptable and like living life. And there was some fantastical elements to it to kind of aid the storytelling. And it was really beautiful. And while I was reading it, I was like, this is cool. I like it. But then like after I finished it, I was thinking about it for a while afterwards. And a lot of books, I've closed the page and I'm like, good book. And then like don't think about it for ever again until I do a video like this. But this one I thought about a lot after I finished it. It was just really well written and the premise was really cool. Next, I read The Expert System's Brother by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was a sci-fi novella. I had a lot of novellas checked out because at the end of December of last year I was trying to like slam a bunch of novellas to get my book count up, so I still had some of those checked out, which is why I started the year with 2 novellas. This one, I don't totally remember what it was about. I gave it 3.5 stars, and that's that. I'm not going to get too far into it because I don't remember what it's about, so don't want to talk about it. Next up, I read Sailing to Sarantium by Guy Gavriel Kay. This is the first book in the Sarantine Mosaic, and this was my first Guy Gavriel Kay book. The hype's real. His prose is excellent. The story was captivating. I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. There were a couple points where I felt like either the pacing got off or like there was just some weird stuff that like sometimes I couldn't pinpoint, but there were certain little things that didn't work well for me. But otherwise, like the story was stunning, his prose is stunning, the characters were captivating. I honestly didn't know what to expect. I didn't know a whole lot about like what this story was about, or even like really what kind of books Guy Gavriel Kay wrote besides fantasy, and besides the fact that he writes a lot of standalones compared to a lot of fantasy authors. So like that is basically all I really knew about him. But yeah, this first book was really good and I had a lot of fun reading it, and it got me on the Guy Gavriel Kay hype train. Next up, I read Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. I read a book by Ava Reid a few years ago that I really enjoyed that I can't remember the name of now, but it was like a fantasy body horror type book. Dang, I can't remember what it's called. but I really enjoyed it, and so I gave this one a try, and it was fine. I don't remember a whole lot about it. Remember enough about it because I know the story of Macbeth, but I don't remember a whole lot about like what made this one a whole lot different. But it basically was the story of Lady Macbeth, and like what happened. I won't spoil it for the people that haven't read the 500-year-old play. Next up, I read The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. This is the author of The Expanse. Or the authors, there's 2 of them. This is their first series since The Expanse, and I think it's their first series besides The Expanse. I think The Expanse is the only series they've ever written together. I found this book to be really cool. It had a really cool premise. It was very political, like The Expanse is. It just felt very reminiscent of The Expanse. Like, you can tell it's written by the same authors. I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm excited for where the series goes from there. Next up, I read Lord of Emperors, which is the second book in the Sarantine Mosaic, and it was better than the first. This book was stunning, and the ending had me tearing up. I thought the ending was really well done. Just the way that Guy Gavriel Kay handled, like, the political intrigue, the different characters, they all felt very unique and very grounded. And the main character that you follow through these books was just really fun to read about. I found it very unique that this very politically driven book was told from the point of view of a mosaicist, which you would not think would be a very political pawn in anyone's like machinations, but he does end up being that, and I think that this series was phenomenal, and I'm excited to read more Guy Gavriel Kay. Next up, I read The Fireborn Blade by Charlotte Bond. This was a fantasy novella about dragon riders, which was fun. I won't get too far into it because, again, it's a novella. I thought it was cool. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was good. Next I read The Green Mile by Stephen King. Surprisingly, I had never read it, and I've never seen it, so I literally went into it blind. I knew nothing about it. I knew some of the actors that were in the movie, but other than that, the only thing I knew about it was that it was in a prison. And man, I went into it with no expectations because we all know, if you've read Stephen King, you know that his books can be hit or miss, but I knew this one was like a well-acclaimed book, and they weren't wrong. This book was incredible, and I had a ton of fun reading it. Well, fun is probably the wrong word. I really enjoyed reading it. I ate it up, and the ending had me like in tears. It was really good. Next up, I read The Brightness Between Us by Elliot Schaefer, which is the second book in the Darkness Outside Us series. The first one was The Darkness Outside Us, and I really enjoyed that book, and I thought that the premise was really cool. It's like a sci-fi romance story, and so I continued on reading the second one, and I don't think the second one was as good as the first one, but I still had a lot of fun reading it, and I found it very interesting, and you got a lot more context for some of the events that happened in the first book, and I thought it was really well done and really cool. Sci-fi romance is something that I'm surprisingly like I haven't read a lot of it, but when I do, I feel like I always think it's really endearing, and I really enjoy reading it, and I wonder if it's because of how like brutal and hostile space as a whole is, that like finding that like connection with somebody is like, I guess, a cool thing. So maybe that's why I'm into it. I don't know. But I have found that I really do enjoy like romance plots in sci-fi books, or a romantic sci-fi book, which this one is definitely a romance book set in space, but there is still like political stuff, and there is a plot. It's not just about the romance, but it is definitely romance heavy. The second one, I would say less so than the first one. The first one definitely is more romantic. Next up, I read The Bloodless Princes, which is the second book after The Fireborn Blade. I feel like I remember less about this one. I think I liked the first one better. This one was fine, but I don't remember a whole lot about it. Next up, I read Asunder by Kirsten Hall. This one, I feel like it had like next to no ratings on Goodreads, but I have seen a lot of like people in the booktube community reading it, and on Bookstagram and stuff, and I loved it. I thought that the characters were really good. It was like the perfect blend of things that I like in books, like a dark fantasy, like female main protagonist, like morally gray characters. I just felt like it had a lot of the stuff in books that I really enjoy, and it worked so well. The plot was crazy good, and I'm like dying for the second book, and I don't know when that will come out. I don't think there's any release date, but again, like there was hardly any ratings on Goodreads, so I don't know like how long we're gonna have to wait. This book just came out last year, so I don't know. I don't know if it's like the second one's in the works or whatever. Admittedly, haven't looked much into it, but I want the second book. I really enjoyed this first book. Next up, I read Let This Radicalize You, Organizing and the Revolution of Reciprocal Care by Kelly Hayes and Mariame Kaba. And this book, this is a nonfiction book about like social justice. I read a lot of books like this, so sometimes some of them feel like information I've already read before, and this one really wasn't. This was less about what we need to be fighting for and more about how to do it and how to organize and how to fight back and how to build that community and stuff. And it was a really interesting thing for me, and it got me looking into like mutual aid groups in my area and ways to help out, ways to build that community, and I found this book really great. Next, I read The Book That Broke the World by Mark Lawrence. This is the second in the library trilogy, the first one being The Book That Wouldn't Burn, and this book was very good. I really like this series a lot. It's set in a magical library, so like, say less. I don't want to get too far into it because I don't want to spoil anything, but there's like a magical library, there's people that are meeting in this like interdimensional space. They don't really know much about it, but they are there taking care of these libraries. There's these kids that live in the library. But yeah, so this is the second book. This just came out last year. Incredible book. I really enjoyed it. I think I might have liked the first one more, but I think part of that might have been while I was listening to this one. I was listening to it at work, and I think I was busy with something, so like there were parts that I was missing, so I think that's on me. But the first one I loved, and this one was also very good. I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read Back in Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People by Imani Perry. It tells the story of Black people as a whole, but it kind of dials in mostly on Black Americans. Tells that history through the use of the color blue by different Black communities. And I thought it was a really interesting way to tell this story. I really enjoyed it, and the prose was really nice. And yeah, I think it was a really interesting read. Next up, I have I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This book came out in 1995, but it's like popping off right now. I feel like everyone's reading it, and for good reason. It's maybe one of the best books I've ever read. If you've ever watched Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, it kind of has a similar premise of like the backstory of Kimmy Schmidt, but not like the whole show. It's about a group of women who are living in a bunker with guards that don't talk to them or anything. They just bring them food and water and stuff. And all of these women have like remember what was out there before this bunker thing happened. No one really knows why they got put in this bunker. It just happened one day. And there is a young woman in the bunker who doesn't remember life outside of the bunker. Something happens one day. The guards rush outside to see what happened and never come back. And the women are able to escape. It just tells their story of like what happens after they get out. And it's all told from the point of view of this young woman. And she talks about how like so much of her life has been, everything she's been taught has been taught by these women, but these women have such a different view of life because they've remember things from the outside and now are stuck in this bunker. And it just is a story of survival while also just trying to live and be a human, and what it means to be human and what it means to be a woman. And like it was honestly such a like harrowing book. Like I'm getting chills just thinking about like how it ends and stuff. And now it's like making me want to read it again. But this is one of the best books I've ever read. It was incredible, and I don't want to spoil it, but like the last half of the book is absolutely wild and highly recommend. If you haven't read this, please do. Next up, I read Emmett by Elsie Rosen. This was a young adult romance that I read for a book club, and it was fine. Young adult romance is not my genre of choice, so I think it was just not my cup of tea, but it was a cute book. It was fine. Next up, I read Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the first book in the Children of Time series. This is a sci-fi book. This is actually, I think, the first book I'd ever heard of by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is very far from his first book by any means. I think this is just the first book I'd ever heard of by him. I loved it. I've heard a lot of good things about it, and everyone's right. This book was really good. It's about humanity Earth is dying, and humanity has this one last chance to like kind of save itself, and something goes wrong, and then there's like this battle for this one world, and it's a whole thing. It's a very good book. It discusses a lot about like, it has a lot of like sociology exploration in it. It talks a lot about like how society works, what makes a society, and it's really cool. I just think sci-fi has such a fun way in general. This type of sci-fi has such a fun way of exploring like what it means to be human, when so much of being human is tied to the earth and how we live here. Like, how do you continue to be human, and how does humanity exist in a place that isn't made for them? And I think that books like this do such a fun, good job of exploring that, and this one was no exception. Next up, I read The Border Keeper by Kirsten Hall, who wrote Asunder, because I wanted to see what else she had written. This book was a novella, and it was good. It was more like a fairy tale type story. It was fine. I gave it 4 stars, so I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I remember enjoying it. Next up, I read The Bootlegger's Bounty by Adriana Herrera. This book was bad. It was purely smut. I saw somebody post about it, and just, they said it was crazy, and I needed something easy to read, and so I read it, and the only reason I finished it is because it took me like 2 hours to read it. It wasn't good. Next, I read Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong, who wrote The Sword of Kaigen, and this book was incredible. I can't decide if I like it more than Sword of Kaigen. I think I do, solely because it has more elements of things that I typically enjoy in books. Not that Sword of Kaigen didn't, because Sword of Kaigen is also a masterpiece, but I loved this book, and Emma Wong is incredible with characters, and this book is also so different from Sword of Kaigen, so it's like really cool to see the like spectrum of books that Emma Wong can write. Granted, I've only read these 2, but they are so different, and I really, really loved this book. Next up, I got on the hype train and read Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. This book was fun. I listened to the audiobook. Shout out to Kyle for giving me that Audible login. This one, it was a lot of fun. I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. If you've been around my channel for a bit, you know that. And so this is kind of has like a Dungeons and Dragons, any sort of TTRPG game like that where you do dungeon crawls, but it's basically like this alien race comes to Earth and kills off most of them, but then the survivors have to like do this, it's basically a reality TV show, but like literally to the death, and they have to like do this dungeon crawl, and there's increasingly difficult levels to the dungeon, and it's got like a charming talking cat, and Carl is like, he knows some about like TTRPGs and stuff, and so he kind of has like a leg up, but you get to like see him interacting with NPCs and things like that, and it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of like taking the book world by storm right now. I actually just started the second one today. Yeah, this one was a lot of fun. I gave it 3.5 stars because some of it was kind of cringe, but I've heard that they get a lot better after this first one, so I did enjoy it. 3.5 stars might be harsh. Maybe I should bump that up to 4, because like in retrospect, I think I might have liked it more. I just think there was some cringe stuff in it that I didn't love. Anyway, next up, I read Grave Empire by Richard Swan. This is the first book in the Great Silence trilogy, which is in the same world as the Justice of Kings series. It's just set in the future. It's like a few hundred years past the end of the last book in the Justice of Kings trilogy. You don't have to have read the Justice of Kings to get this. You'll catch on to a few things if you have, but it won't make this book confusing if you haven't read it. This book was good. I don't think it was as strong of a start as Justice of Kings was. I loved Justice of Kings, and I enjoyed the second book, and then the third book I might have DNF'd. I think I DNF'd the third book. I didn't like it at all. But I gave this one a shot, and I did like it, but I didn't like it as much as Justice of Kings, which makes me a little nervous. I think it also might have been the audiobook. Maybe that just wasn't working for me, so the second one, I think I'm going to maybe reread this, and then read the second one, and see if I like it more physically, and then read the second one physically as well. But yeah, it's similar vein of Justice of Kings. There's a lot of the same themes, just exploring the society down the road, and like, you kind of see some of the ramifications and how society has changed, how the Empire has changed since the end of that trilogy, and what is going on now. and like the state of magic is a lot different in this trilogy than it was in that first one. So I thought that was a really interesting exploration. So overall, it was a good book. I just remember loving The Justice of Kings, and I didn't love this one, but it was good. Next up, I read We Ride the Storm by Devin Madsen. This is the first book in the Reborn Empire trilogy. No, it's not a trilogy. I think there's 4 of them. I did really enjoy this. I gave it 3.5 stars, but, well, I'm currently reading the second one, and I'm almost done with it. I'm reading it on audio, and I'm really liking that one, so I think that's influencing my what I remember of this one. It's a very politics-heavy fantasy story with multi-POVs. I tried reading this, I think, last year, and I DNF'd it, and I think it was just like a timing thing. I had a hard time reading a lot of books last year, so I think that was a timing thing. And then I read another book by Devin Madsen that I can't remember the name of, but it was like a dragon-based book. It was like, dragon is in the title, I can't remember what it's called, but I remember really liking that one, so I was like, let me try We Ride the Storm again, and I did like it a lot the second time, and I'm really enjoying the second one. I think more than the first, considering this is 3.5, and I'm thinking the second one's gonna probably be a 4-star. But yeah, this one was really fun. Again, politics heavy, multi-POV, very cool story. Next up, I read Dark Dawn by Jay Kristoff. This is the 3rd book in the Nevernight Chronicle. I loved it. I think the series is great. I think Jay Kristoff is great. I'm on the Jay Kristoff hype train. I talked about Nevernight in my last video, and the second one, there were some things that didn't work for me in the second one, but this third one was incredible, and it was dark, and it was sad, and I cried, and I think that Jay Kristoff does a really good job at relationships, whether it be friendship relationships, romantic relationships. I think he just does a really good job of creating believable relationships that I felt really invested, but also the magic is really cool. The politics are really interesting and fun to follow along. Overall, an incredible book, and I cried. It was very good. Next up, I read Shaman's Crossing by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Soldier Sun trilogy. This is her trilogy that is outside of the Realm of the Elderlings. This is my first book I've ever read of Robin Hobb's outside of the Realm of the Elderlings. I actually don't... I know she has some books as Megan Lindholm, but I think this is the only other books she's written outside of the Realm of the Elderlings. And it was very good. It did take me a long time to read. It is pretty long, and it took me a while to read, which I think dampened my enjoyment. If a book takes me too long to read, I get bored just because it's like I need something else. So I think that there are parts that were slow, and that's kind of like Robin Hobb's thing. She writes books that kind of are slow-paced. Not always, not all of her books are slow-paced, but like she is known for slower-paced books, and I think that I just wasn't as sold on this main character as I was with Fitz, like in Assassin's Apprentice. I still gave this 4 stars because the ending was still really, really good, and I'm excited to continue. Her prose, as always, is stunning. She creates these incredibly unique worlds that are like just like I feel like there's so many things in fantasy that like are through lines. Like there's so many tropes that are used multiple times, and like we eat them up. They're used for a reason. So like that's not a complaint, but she like just does something different with fantasy that like no other authors do, and she does it so well. So this book was very good. I gave it 4 stars just because of the pacing. I felt like some of it was slow, and there were times where I just like didn't want to pick it up, but the ending brought me back in. I'm excited for the second one. It was great. Next up, I read The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. This book is the second book by Simon Jimenez I've read. The first one being The Spear Cuts Through Water, and he might be one of my new favorite authors. The Spear Cuts Through Water was great, but I didn't want to like call him a favorite author after having read one book. This one was also great and so different from The Spear Cuts Through Water. Spear Cuts Through Water was more fantasy based, while this is very sci-fi, but he has such a way of telling stories in general. Like the way he tells the stories is great, his prose is great, but also his characters are just like phenomenal. And this one has a lot of like time travel type stuff and a lot of like those kind of sci-fi themes that are used to tell these like beautiful stories. It's multi-POV, spans a long time. Incredible book. Next up, I read Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This book has been going around. Everyone's talking about it. It was fine. I didn't really know what to expect. It's like a magical realism, I guess, and I only say magical realism because one of the POVs is an octopus. It's really just like kind of like a mystery contemporary fiction book just about like this family or these like multiple families, and one of the POVs is this octopus in this aquarium. It was fine. It was like some of the reveals towards the end were good, but I really mostly enjoyed the octopus's point of view, and he had the least chapters, so it was just okay. Next up, I read Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. This was just a contemporary romance book about these two musicians. I thought it was fun. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. It was interesting, and I thought the romance was believable. Next up, I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, which is the new Hunger Games book that follows Haymitch's Hunger Games. Suzanne did it again. This woman. I didn't really like Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I thought it was unnecessary. It didn't add a lot. Didn't love it. But I did reread the Hunger Games trilogy. I don't think I ever got to Mockingjay, but I read the first two last year, and they keep up. They have not aged poorly. They've aged incredibly. They're still bangers of books. But I did go into this one with a little bit more hesitance just because I didn't like Ballad of Songbirds and Snake. A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. But this one was incredible. Sunrise on the Reaping was so good. It was also so dark. The like last 10% of the book, I was like, surely it can't get worse. And I mean, it makes sense because like when we meet Haymitch in the Hunger Games, he's just like a drunk guy who is the only living victor of the Hunger Games from District 12, who has no friends or family and just drinks himself to sleep every day. So like, we had to get there somehow, but man, it's dark. And like, I was talking to like Ian and Kyle and Alex about, because we all read it around the same time, and the premise of the Hunger Games has just been around for a while. Those books came out a long time ago. They came out when I was like a teen. So like sorry again for the plane noises. The premise of the Hunger Games has been around for a while. So like, I feel like just as a concept, we've kind of become numb to it. But in this book, she really doesn't let you. She's like, no, don't forget, this is children fighting to the death for the entertainment of this capitalistic society. And it is truly just like so harrowing, and it's dark, and it's gory without like being really gory on the page, but like she doesn't pull punches. She makes sure you know that what is happening is not okay. And yeah, the end of the book was just like truly devastating. The epilogue kind of like brought it back up a little bit, but barely. Like, I was still just like, man, because like Haymitch fought in the 25th Hunger Games. The first Hunger Games in the Hunger Games book, I think, is the 49th, because then yeah, the second book is the 50th. So he literally goes 24 years from like between those two books, and it's just so dark to think about. Like a quarter of his life, or probably more than a quarter of his life, is spent just like drunk and sad, and it's terrible. Almost done, guys. Next up, I read Guards by Terry Pratchett. This is the first book in the City Watch like strain of books in Discworld. This is my first Discworld book, and it was fun. It was exactly what I expected from like what people talked about, like a kind of comedy short fantasy book. I enjoyed it. It didn't wow me, but I have hope, because I kind of got some of those like little sneak peeks into like the bigger world of the Discworld, the like bigger universe, and I know nothing about Discworld. I know that there's like Mort or whatever, or the death guy, and that's like literally all I know. But I do know I know it's like Discworld is like a big, maybe a multiverse. I know nothing. Those kind of like larger picture kind of things always are really interesting to me, so like I am gonna continue on. While this one didn't wow me, I still think it was fun, and it was a good read, and it was short. Short-ish. I always thought that these books were gonna be like 4 hour reads. This was still 400 something pages, but short-ish. It's like a quicker read, and because it's fun, it makes it easier to digest. But I did find it like there were times where I was like, I don't actually want to read that right now. I would just read like a few pages at a time. But here we are. It was good. I am going to continue. Last but not least, I just finished this today. The River Has Roots by Amal El Motar. This is the author of, what's that book? The one with the bread and the blue bird on it. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it was very popular on BookTube for a bit and Bookstagram. It's the sci-fi novella with the red bird and the blue bird on it. Can't remember what it's called, but it has like a lesbian romance as like the sci-fi story. Anyway, this one was more fantasy based and it was beautiful. It's also very short. It's 133 pages. It was stunning. I read it. I started it last night and I finished it today. It was phenomenal. Beautiful story. It had the like fairy tale kind of telling, like there was a fae realm and then the human realm, and kind of like the blending of those two, and it follows these two sisters, and it's got like a beautiful sister relationship. It's there is a romance plot, but the relationship that is more focused in the story is the sisters, and I love that kind of story, like Frozen vibes, you know. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I really liked the Red of the Bluebird book too. Let me look it up. Let me look up what it's called because I'm embarrassed. This is How You Lose the Time War, right? So I don't have to call it the Red and Bluebird book anymore. Anyway, I loved that book too. I think I liked this one more, but I think that's because I read this one physically and I listened to This Is How You Lose the Time War. I think if I read that one physically, I'd like it better the second time, because it's kind of, a lot of times like sci-fi novellas like that kind of can get a little confusing, and I think I didn't fully understand the science part of it, so it was harder for me to get invested in the romance side of it. So I think if I read it physically, I'd like it more. But this one was beautiful. And also, let me show the book itself. I normally don't pre-order novellas, but I knew I would love this book, so I did, and I'm so glad I did. It's like beautiful. There's like a lot of like every page has like, because like one of the main settings is like it's on this river and there's these willow trees overlooking the river, so there's like even on the regular pages there's like willow leaves like hanging over the page. It's just a beautiful book. The cover's pretty. The story's amazing. Anyway, that is the 32 books I've read since the start of this year. Phew, that was a doozy. I feel like I've been talking forever, and this clip is 42 minutes, so it's a lot of editing for future me. And by future me, I mean right after this, I'll probably edit this. Anyway, that is what I've read so far this year. Comment down below what you've been reading, because I've been slacking on watching BookTube. Also, not all of you are booktubers that watch, so comment down below like your top 2 or 3 favorite books you've read since the beginning of this year. I'd love to hear it, love to talk about it. If you've loved or hated any of these books I read, let me know. Thank you guys for watching. I don't know when my next video will be because I am going to Japan again. I leave next week and I'm gone for 2 weeks. We're going so my son can meet his great-grandma and great-uncles. So I don't know when my next video will be, but it won't be as quickly as this one was after the last one. But hopefully shortly after I get back, I'll be able to record one. We'll see. I assume I won't be able to read much while I'm there. Last time I messed up by starting a Malazan book right before I left, and then like it took me like a month and a half to read that Malazan book because I didn't read much while I was in Japan because I was busy. And I was actually, I haven't read a Malazan book since that one, and that was 2 years ago. And I was actually trying to pick my next read earlier today, and I was like, what if I started Malazan? And I was like, don't do it. You messed up last time when you did that. So anyway, all that to say, I don't know when my next video will be, but I'm excited to interact again. I'm back-ish. Again, no promises, but I'm having fun. So thank you guys for watching. If you could like, comment, and subscribe, that'd be great. Try to get that algorithm back on my side after being gone for basically 2 years if we don't count the video from 10 months ago. So anyway, thank you guys. I hope you have a great April, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks. Thank you.